$6 million doesn't walk in here in a cardigan. Randy said it loud enough for the whole lobby to hear, and then he laughed at his own joke. Nobody laughed with him. Then he tore the check. Twice. He let the pieces fall into her lap like she was a trash can with a hairstyle. Cathleen Gaines did not raise her voice. She looked down at her hands curled tight in her lap and made herself a promise she had made before, on harder days than this one. Not today. Not for him. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about strength. Sometimes it isn't staying calm. Sometimes it's a woman fighting the version of herself who would have been completely right to scream right there in front of everyone. Have you ever had to hold that line? Had to fight the part of you that wanted to burn the whole room down because you knew one wrong word and they'd say you proved them right? In 4 minutes, a man in a gray suit would walk through those doors, see her sitting there, and call her ma'am. Like the word itself was an apology. But first, let's go back to that morning, before the lobby, before the check, before Randy Nicolas ever opened his mouth. Cathleen Gaines woke up at 5:40, same as she had every day for 11 years, before the alarm even got the chance to earn its keep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the ceiling fan in the hallway, slow, uneven, the kind of sound you stop hearing until 3 in the morning when nothing else is talking. She lay there for a minute with her eyes open, doing the thing she always did before her feet touched the floor, counting backward from the life she used to have to the one she was standing in now. 19 years old, folding towels at a laundromat on Fentress Avenue, doing algebra homework on the back of a receipt because she couldn't afford a second notebook. That was the woman she still argued with in her head some mornings. That woman didn't believe any of this was real yet. Kathleen had learned not to argue back too hard. Gratitude and disbelief live close together, and if you're not careful, disbelief starts running the whole house. She showered fast, the way her mother taught her. Water bill money doesn't grow on trees, baby, and stood in front of her closet for longer than she meant to. 3 suits hung there like a small, patient jury. The navy one, sharp, forgettable, safe. The black one, funeral adjacent, too serious for a Tuesday. And the lilac one, soft, expensive, the one her stylist called confident but kind. Kathleen touched the sleeve of it and thought about her mother's hands, how they used to smell like bleach and orange peel no matter how much lotion she put on after a double shift. Odell Gaines had cleaned 3 different office buildings across 2 decades of her life, including, though Kathleen wouldn't learn this until much later, the downtown headquarters of the very bank she was about to walk into. She picked the lilac. Today needed kind. Today needed a woman who looked like she belonged in the room before she'd said a single word. Because Cathleen Gaines had learned a long time ago that the room decides about you before you get a sentence out, and your only real choice is what you hand it to decide with. Downstairs, her daughter Imani was already at the kitchen island in her cap and gown rehearsal outfit, scrolling her phone with one hand and eating cereal dry out of the box with the other, a habit Kathleen had given up correcting 3 years ago. "You nervous?" Imani asked, not looking up. "For what, baby?" "The bank thing, the big check thing." Kathleen almost laughed. She poured coffee into a thermos that had a small crack near the handle she kept meaning to replace and never did, because some things you keep not because they're useful, but because they've survived things with you. "It's just paperwork," she said. "I built the thing. The check is just somebody agreeing I built it." That wasn't the whole truth, and both of them knew it, though only one of them would have said so out loud. $6 million was not just paperwork to a woman who once had exactly $11 in checking and had cried in a Food Lion parking lot doing math in her head about which bill could wait another week. Kathleen had sold Gaines Regional Logistics for enough money to change the rest of her family's story, and some quiet, superstitious part of her still expected somebody, somewhere, to come tell her it had all been a clerical error. "Rehearsal's at 4, Imani said. "Don't be that mom who's late to her own kid's graduation practice." "I have never once been late to anything of yours." "There's a first time for everything, Ma." Kathleen kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathed in the coconut smell of her shampoo, and felt something tighten low in her chest. The specific ache of loving a child who was one signature and one stage walk away from not needing you to drive her anywhere anymore. She did not have time to sit with that feeling. She had learned, over the years, to fold feelings the way her mother used to fold towels at that laundromat. Fast, tight, corners even, so they'd take up less room and you could carry more of them at once. The drive to the bank took 18 minutes, and Kathleen spent 11 of them on the phone with her accountant confirming wire details, and the remaining 7 with the radio turned up on the gospel station her mother used to keep on in the car, the volume just under the place where you'd actually call it loud. She didn't sing along. She never did. She just liked having her mother's kind of quiet in the car with her, the version of company that doesn't ask anything of you. The folder sat on the passenger seat where a person might sit. Kathleen had glanced at it twice at red lights, not because she doubted what was inside it, but because there is a particular disbelief that doesn't fully leave you even after the math checks out 3 separate times. Inside that folder was a check with more zeros than her mother had made in 40 years of night shifts combined. And Kathleen carried that fact the way you carry a secret you're proud of and ashamed of at the same time, because pride in the wrong room gets read as something else entirely. And Cathleen Gaines had spent her whole adult life learning exactly how to carry pride so it wouldn't get mistaken for anything that could be used against her. She pulled into the parking lot at 9:52, 8 minutes early, and sat for a moment with the engine off, hands on the wheel, doing the thing she always did before walking into any room that mattered. She thought of a sentence her mother used to say, standing at the ironing board at 11 at night, sleeves rolled, patient as a held breath. You don't have to be loud to be taken seriously, Kathy. You just have to be undeniable. Kathleen had built a company on that sentence. She had buried her mother believing it. And she straightened the lapel of her lilac blazer in the rearview mirror, picked up the folder, and walked toward the glass doors of Halbrook Federal Bank with no idea that in 11 minutes, a man she had never met would try to prove that sentence wrong in front of 40 strangers and a phone camera, and that the only thing standing between her and the version of herself she'd spent 30 years trying not to become would be the length of one breath, held all the way through. Randy Nicolas had been at his desk since 7:15, 20 minutes before the branch even opened, staring at an email he'd already read 4 times. The subject line said, Ellsworth North Performance Review Q3. But Randy had stopped needing to open emails like that to know what they said. He knew the language now. Restructuring opportunities, right-sizing branch overhead. Words that meant somebody above him had already drawn a line through something, and the only question left was whether that something was a job title or a person. His coffee had gone cold in the mug his ex-wife bought him 4 Christmases ago, the one that said, World's Okayest Golfer, a joke that had been funnier when they were still married. He drank it anyway, bitter, room temperature, because getting up to microwave, it felt like admitting he had time to spare. And Randy Nicolas did not have time to spare. Not this month. Not with Diane Kessler's name, no relation to Walter, a different Kessler, the district compliance officer attached to 3 different emails asking why his branch's risk flag conversion rate was the lowest in the region. He had 2 write-ups in his file already. One for a missed loan fraud flag back in February that turned out to be nothing, a false alarm that cost the bank nothing, and cost Randy a formal note in his HR folder anyway, one for being short-staffed on a Saturday and letting the lobby wait times run long enough that somebody complained to corporate. Neither one was really his fault. Both of them were his problem. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother, the one who still lived in their hometown and worked construction and never seemed to carry this particular kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from wearing a tie every day to a job that could disappear on a Tuesday for reasons nobody would fully explain to you. You good? The text said. Randy typed all good, busy week, and didn't send it for almost a full minute, thumb hovering. Because some questions you can't answer honestly, and can't ignore either. He'd bought a house 18 months ago, a modest 3-bedroom in a subdivision with a name that promised more nature than it delivered, Willow Bend, though there wasn't a willow in sight. The mortgage was fine as long as the job was fine. That was the whole equation. That was the entire architecture holding up his life. And Randy had learned the way people learn things by living through them, rather than being told that architecture like that doesn't announce when it's about to fail. It just fails. And you're standing in the wreckage, wondering why you didn't see the cracks. At 8:40, his district manager called. Not texted, not emailed. Called, which was worse, because a phone call meant somebody wanted to hear your voice change in real time. Randy, I'll be straight with you, the voice said, A man named Corbett Randy had met exactly twice in person. Corporate's looking at consolidating Ellsworth North with the Ridgeline branch. 2 managers, 1 branch, you do that math. I need your numbers to justify keeping this location standalone, and right now, they don't. What numbers, specifically? Risk management visibility, fraud catches, compliance flags. Anything that shows this branch is protecting the institution, not just processing transactions. You've got till end of month. Randy said, understood, in a voice that came out steadier than he felt. And after Corbett hung up, Randy sat there with the phone still against his ear for a few seconds, listening to the dial tone like it might change its mind and say something kinder. He splashed water on his face in the branch bathroom, the fluorescent light overhead buzzing the same tired hum it always did, and looked at himself in a mirror that needed cleaning. 38 years old. A framed photo of his daughter, 6 years old, back at the house on his nightstand, and child support that came out of his check the second Friday of every month before he saw a dime of it. He thought about the Coach handbag his ex-wife had wanted for 2 Christmases running that he'd never been able to afford, and how she used to say, not unkindly, just tired, you always find a way to almost make it, Randy. He walked back to his desk and pulled up the morning's schedule of expected large transactions, a habit compliance had asked every manager to adopt 6 months ago under the Enhanced Diligence Initiative, which Randy privately thought was corporate's way of making managers do the compliance department's job, without giving them the compliance department's salary. Most days, he glanced at the list and moved on. Today, he read it twice, because today he needed a number to bring to Corbett by Friday, some visible proof that his branch was catching something, flagging something, protecting the bank from something, and the list showed one transaction that stood out from the rest of the ordinary Tuesday noise. A deposit, $6 million. Personal account, new to the branch, first-time large transaction. Randy stared at that line for a long moment, the cursor blinking beside it, and felt something ugly and practical click into place in the back of his mind, the kind of thought a decent man tells himself isn't really what it is. If I catch this one, if I flag this one hard, visibly, publicly enough that it gets noticed upstairs, that's my number. That's the thing I bring to Corbett. He didn't let himself finish the thought all the way to its ending. The part where a stranger walking through his doors that morning was about to become a line item in his own survival plan, a body between him and the restructuring memo. He just closed the laptop, straightened his tie in the reflection of the dark screen, and told himself the same thing he'd been telling himself for 18 months of barely making the mortgage. You do what you have to do. You figure it out. At 9:58, the doors unlocked. The overhead lights caught the marble floor Randy had once been proud of, back when this job still felt like something he'd built instead of something he was scrambling to keep. He stood near the teller line, hands in his pockets, watching the glass doors the way a man watches a door he doesn't yet know is about to change the rest of his life. And at 10:02, a woman in a lilac blazer walked in carrying a leather folder. And Randy Nicolas, without knowing her name, without knowing a single true thing about her, decided in the space of about 4 seconds that she was going to be his number. Cathleen crossed the marble floor with the folder held against her hip, the way she used to carry her books in high school, close to the body, a habit her mother once said made her look like she was bracing for rain even on sunny days. She didn't know that about herself. She just knew it felt safer. Randy watched her the whole way from the teller line, and by the time she reached the counter, he had already rearranged his face into something he thought looked like polite skepticism, but actually looked like a man who had decided something before anyone gave him a reason to. "Good morning," Kathleen said, setting the folder down and opening it with both hands, the same careful motion she used every time, corners lined up, nothing rushed. "I'd like to deposit this." Randy didn't reach for it right away. He looked at the check first from where he stood, the way you'd look at a spill on someone else's carpet, and then he looked at her. The lilac blazer, the gold hoops, the manicure, soft pink, done 2 days ago at a little shop off Route 9 that she'd been going to for 6 years, back when $6 for a tip was a stretch. $6 million, Randy said, and let the number sit in the air a second too long. That's a lot of check for a Tuesday. "It's the proceeds from a business sale," Kathleen said. "I can have my attorney's office confirm it by phone right now if that's helpful." "I'm sure you can." He picked up the check finally, turned it over once, twice, The way a man reads something he's already decided is fake, we do get a lot of these come through. People trying things. I'm not trying anything. I'm depositing a check into my own account. A woman near the velvet ropes, waiting for the next available teller, glanced up from her phone. A man in a golf polo 2 windows down slowed his conversation with his own teller just enough to listen better. Kathleen felt the room shift the way a room does right before it decides to watch you instead of just share space with you. And she recognized the feeling immediately because she'd felt it before at a car dealership in her 20s when a salesman asked her 3 separate times if she wanted to check with someone about financing, and at a hospital in her 30s when a nurse asked if she was sure she was on the visitor list for her own mother's room. Randy set the check down flat on the counter, not handing it back, just leaving it there between them like evidence. $6 million doesn't walk in here in a cardigan, he said, and he laughed, short and pleased with himself, like he'd earned that line. It wasn't even a cardigan. It was a $2,000 blazer she'd bought for herself the week her company sale closed. The first genuinely extravagant thing she'd ever purchased, and she remembered standing in the fitting room mirror thinking, this is what it looks like when the fear finally lets go a little. Hearing him flatten it into cardigan felt smaller than it should have, and that smallness made something tighten low in her stomach, a feeling she recognized as dangerous precisely because it was so familiar. I'd like you to verify the check, she said, keeping her voice level. Call the issuing bank. There's a reference number printed at the bottom. I know how checks work, ma'am. Then you know that's the fastest way to settle this. Near the door, a security guard shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His name tag said Desmond Waller, and he was maybe 26, built like he still played some kind of ball on weekends, with a small chip in his front tooth he was self-conscious about, and a habit of touching the corner of his mouth when he was nervous, which he was doing now. He had clocked something the second Kathleen walked past him. A smell, faint, some kind of orange and something lotion, and it had pulled a thread in him he couldn't name yet, something from a childhood kitchen, his mother's hands, after a long shift, though he wouldn't understand why until much later, when a name would surface that connected 2 women who never got to meet each other. For now, it was just a feeling, small and strange, and it made him watch Kathleen a little closer than protocol required. Sir, Kathleen said again evenly, I'm asking you to make 1 phone call. And I'm telling you, Randy said, and his voice climbed a notch, performing now for the small gathering audience the way people do when they've decided being watched means they must be right, that we see this exact scenario more than you'd think. People come in here with a story and a nice outfit and expect us to just hand over the verification without doing our jobs. I'm not asking you to skip verification. I'm asking you to do it. A woman near the ropes murmured something to the man beside her, low, half a laugh in it, and Kathleen caught only fragments. Something about people trying it, the same tired script she'd heard variations of her whole life, and she felt the muscles in her jaw tighten, felt her own pulse doing something quick and hot behind her ears, and thought with a kind of exhausted clarity, not today, not for him, the promise she'd made to herself in the car, already being tested 20 minutes into the day. Desmond took 1 step closer, close enough now to hear the reference number Kathleen had mentioned, and something in him wanted to say it out loud himself, wanted to say, sir, she's right, that's a 30-second call, but the words caught somewhere behind his teeth. Because he'd been at this job 4 months. Because his manager, this exact manager, had already written him up once for overstepping when he'd helped an elderly customer fill out a form the teller was too busy to assist with because rent in this city didn't care what was right, only what was paid on time. He stayed quiet and hated himself a little for it, and told himself he'd find another way to help. Later, smaller, safer. At the second teller window, a young woman named Priya had her hand halfway raised, ready to offer to make the call herself, and then watched Randy's face and lowered it again, the offer dying in her throat before it became sound. Nobody moved. Nobody but Kathleen, who stood very still, hands folded over the folder, watching a room full of people decide, one small cowardice at a time, that her dignity wasn't worth the risk of speaking up for. Randy picked the check back up, held it a little higher this time, angled it so the small crowd gathering near the ropes could see it clearly, like a magician about to reveal a trick everyone already suspected. "I think," he said, loud enough now that it wasn't really for Kathleen anymore, "we both know what this actually is." Kathleen kept her hands flat on the counter, because she'd learned a long time ago that hands tell on you before your voice does. "You don't know anything about what this is," she said. "You know a number and a face, and you've decided which one wins." "I know protocol," Randy said. "You invented protocol about 4 minutes ago." A ripple of something moved through the small crowd near the ropes. Not quite a laugh, more like a held breath, deciding which way to fall. The man in the golf polo had his phone up now, filming low against his hip, pretending he wasn't. Priya, at the second window, had both hands frozen over her keyboard, watching. Desmond had drifted 2 steps closer to the counter, close enough that Kathleen could see him now out of the corner of her eye, young, jaw tight, looking at Randy the way you look at someone you used to respect, finding out something ugly about them in real time. Randy held the check up between 2 fingers, turned it so the little crowd could see the number printed in the corner, 6 zeros doing exactly what he wanted them to do, making the room gasp on his behalf. "People like you," he said, and something about the way he said "people like you" made Kathleen's stomach drop the way it used to drop as a teenager standing at a store counter, watching a manager's eyes travel down to her hands before they ever looked at her face. "Don't walk in here with $6 million in a folder. You walk in here with a story." "Call the number on the check," Kathleen said again, and her voice had gone very quiet now. Quiet in the specific way her mother's voice used to go quiet right before she said something you'd remember for the rest of your life. "That's all I've asked you to do since I walked in. 1 phone call. I don't need to call anybody to know a forgery when I—" "You don't know what a forgery looks like. You know what discomfort looks like, and you're calling it instinct." Randy's jaw tightened. Somewhere behind him, a printer beeped and went quiet. He looked at the check one more time, and Kathleen watched something small and mean settle into his face, the specific look of a man who has already decided the story he's going to tell about this afternoon and just needs an ending that matches it. He tore it. The sound was smaller than Kathleen expected. Paper doesn't scream the way the moment feels like it should. It just gives, quick and clean. And then he did it again, and the 2 halves became 4, and he let them fall. Not threw them exactly, just opened his fingers and let gravity do the cruelty for him, and the pieces drifted down onto the counter and into her lap. Lilac fabric dotted now with pale green confetti that used to be worth more than most people made in a decade. For 1 full second, nobody in that lobby breathed, and Kathleen felt something come up her throat that she had spent 30 years learning how to swallow. She felt the shape of the sentence before she even had the words for it, felt it rising the way heat rises off a stove. Something about his mortgage, his cheap tie, the way men like him always found someone smaller to stand on when their own floor started cracking, something she knew, with total clarity, would be the most satisfying 11 words she'd ever said out loud, and the most expensive ones too, because a phone was pointed at her face right now, and the internet does not care who started it, it only remembers who finished it ugly. Her mother's voice arrived instead, uninvited, from some drawer in her chest she hadn't opened in years. "You don't have to be loud to be taken seriously, Kathy. You just have to be undeniable." Kathleen closed her mouth around the sentence she almost said. She felt it sit there, unsaid, heavy on her tongue, like a coin she'd decided not to spend. Her hands, still flat on the counter, were shaking now, just barely, just enough that she pressed her palms down harder to stop it, and she looked down at the torn pieces scattered across marble and lilac wool, and made herself breathe out slow through her nose, the way she used to breathe through pain in the delivery room 19 years ago. One long exhale standing between her and something she couldn't take back. "You just made a mistake you can't undo," she said, and her voice came out steady, almost gentle, which somehow landed harder in that lobby than if she'd screamed. "Not because of who I am, because of what you just did in front of 40 witnesses and every camera in this room, to a customer who asked you, politely, 3 separate times, to make 1 phone call." Randy opened his mouth. Some instinct in him reaching for the joke again, the easy laugh that had worked on him his whole life, to cover the parts of himself he didn't want, looked at too closely, and it didn't come. Because for the first time since she'd walked through those doors, he was looking at her face instead of her blazer, and something in it, the stillness, the control, the absolute refusal to give him the reaction he'd been fishing for, made the confidence drain out of him fast, the way it does when a man realizes the audience he performed for has quietly started watching him differently. Desmond stepped forward then, not toward Randy, toward Kathleen, and crouched without a word, and began gathering the torn pieces off the floor with careful hands, the way you'd pick up something breakable that had already broken. He didn't say sorry. He didn't need to. Kathleen looked down at him doing that small, useless, decent thing, and felt her eyes go hot in a way she refused to let finish, and thought, with the strange clarity grief sometimes brings even into rooms that have nothing to do with grief, that her mother used to kneel just like that. Careful hands, unglamorous work, invisible to everyone who benefited from it. "Ma'am," Desmond said quietly, holding the pieces up to her, not to Randy, "I've got these." That was the moment the phone in the golf polo man's hand caught clearest. Later, when it circulated to 900,000 people who had never met Cathleen Gaines and never would. Not the tear, not Randy's voice climbing into cruelty. A young security guard on his knees, gathering the wreckage of a stranger's dignity off a marble floor, while the woman it belonged to stood very still, hands no longer shaking, having just won a fight nobody in that lobby even understood she'd been having, against herself. The glass doors opened with a soft, mechanical sigh, and a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped through. Briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. Mid-sentence on a call he ended the second he registered the scene in front of him. Walter Kessler had driven 40 minutes from the regional office for a 10 o'clock meeting he'd had circled on his calendar for 3 weeks. A meeting with a new institutional client whose portfolio, if the numbers held, would make Halbrook Federal's fourth quarter. He stopped one step past the threshold, briefcase still in hand, and looked at the scattered pale green pieces on the marble floor before he looked at anything else. Then he looked up and saw Kathleen. His face did something Randy would replay in his head for weeks afterward, a kind of collapse that started at the eyes and moved down through the jaw. The particular expression of a man watching a catastrophe he can't undo happening to someone he respects. He crossed the lobby fast, dress shoes loud against stone, and stopped in front of her with his head dipped slightly, the posture of an apology before any words had been assembled to carry it. "Miss Gaines," he said, and something cracked slightly in the middle of her name. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. I had no idea you'd already arrived. I was told 10. I should have been here at 9:40. Walter," Kathleen said, and her voice, still steady, still quiet, had softened just slightly at the sight of a familiar face, the first one in that lobby that had looked at her like a person instead of a problem. "It's all right." "It is not." He turned then, and his eyes found Randy, standing frozen behind the counter with his hand still hovering near where the check used to be. "What happened here?" Randy's mouth opened, and for a second nothing came out. He had rehearsed a version of this conversation a dozen times in his head over the past month, standing in front of Corbett, presenting numbers, proving himself useful, indispensable, safe. He had never once rehearsed standing in front of his regional president with torn currency-grade paper at his feet and a woman in a lilac blazer watching him with a stillness that felt, somehow, worse than anger. "Sir, we had a large deposit come through that raised some flags on my end, and given the compliance directives about enhanced diligence, I made the call to—" "You tore it," Walter said, "not a question. I was following protocol. There is no protocol in this bank," Walter said, and his voice had gone low now. Low the way voices go when a person is working very hard not to raise them in public. That involves destroying a customer's property in front of a lobby full of phones. "Miss Gaines is the founder of Gaines Regional Logistics. She sold that company for enough to make her one of the largest depositors this branch has ever seen. And she was gracious enough to consider moving her personal accounts here as a courtesy to me because her attorney and I went to law school together 20 years ago." He paused and something in his face tightened further. "I flew in a compliance consultant last month specifically to modernize how we verify large transactions with dignity." And you tore the check in her lap. Randy's face had gone the color of the wall behind him. "I didn't know who she—" "That's the part I need you to hear," Walter said, quieter now, almost gentle, which somehow landed heavier than shouting would have. "It shouldn't have mattered who she was. It should never have mattered. Kathleen watched this unfold with the pieces of her check still scattered across the counter and her lap. Watched Randy's composure come apart in real time. Watched Desmond stand a few feet back holding the torn pieces he'd gathered like they were something fragile and important, and felt a temptation rise in her that she hadn't expected. It would be easy right now. One sentence. She could ask Walter to fire him on the spot, publicly, could let this room watch Randy Nicolas lose everything the way he'd tried to make her lose something in front of all of them, could let the phones capture that too. A clean, satisfying ending, the kind people would share for the justice of it. She thought of Randy's face when he'd first looked at her, that flicker of contempt dressed up as caution. She thought of every counter, every dealership, every hospital front desk that had made her feel like she needed to prove herself worthy of basic decency before anyone would extend it to her. She had every reason. And then she thought about her mother, mopping floors in a building not unlike this one, invisible to men exactly like Randy Nicolas for 20 years, never once given the chance to be seen as anything other than the woman who cleaned up after people who mattered. Odell Gaines had never gotten the satisfaction of a reversal like this. She had only ever gotten Monday and then another Monday, and had built her daughter's whole future out of 1,000 of those unglamorous, ungraded Mondays without ever once getting to watch someone apologize to her in a marble lobby. Kathleen did not think mercy would have made her mother proud. Exactly. She thought her mother would have understood the difference between mercy and exhaustion, and chosen the version of this moment that let her go home to her daughter without carrying one more heavy thing in her chest. "Walter," she said, and the room, which had been holding its breath waiting for her verdict, seemed to lean in. "I don't want him fired in front of a crowd of people filming this on their phones. That's not justice. That's just a different version of the same show he put on for me." Randy's eyes came up to hers, startled, something raw and unguarded moving through his face for the first time since she'd walked in. "There should be consequences," Kathleen continued. "Real ones. A proper review, not a spectacle. And there should be something built here so this doesn't happen to the next person who doesn't have a Walter Kessler walking through those doors at the right minute." She glanced down at Desmond, still holding the torn pieces carefully, like he hadn't decided yet whether they still mattered. And that young man deserves to be recognized for the only decent thing anybody did in this room today. Walter nodded slowly, jaw tight, already calculating everything this would cost the branch, the review board, the headlines that were surely already forming out of the footage on those phones. He turned to Randy. "My office, now. Don't touch your terminal." Randy walked past Kathleen on his way out from behind the counter and stopped, just for a second, close enough that only she could hear him. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice had none of the performance left in it. Just a man standing in the wreckage of a morning he couldn't take back. "I was scared of losing everything, and I made someone else pay for it." Kathleen looked at him for a long moment, at the tie he probably couldn't really afford, the exhaustion under his eyes that she recognized because she carried a version of it herself, and said the only true thing she had left in her. "I know what scared looks like, Randy. I've worn it plenty of times myself. But you don't get to hand it to somebody else and call it their fault for catching it." 3 weeks later, Kathleen sat in a conference room on the 14th floor of Halbrook Federal's downtown headquarters, the same building she would learn that afternoon, where her mother used to push a cleaning cart down these exact hallways after the last analyst went home. Nobody had told her that yet. She was still just a woman in a charcoal Max Mara blazer this time, not the lilac one, sitting across from Walter Kessler and 2 members of the Compliance Review Board, listening to them describe, in careful corporate language, what had been decided about Randy Nicolas. He wasn't fired. Kathleen had asked for that specifically, and Walter had honored it, though not without resistance from 2 board members who wanted the clean optics of a termination they could put in a press release. Randy was suspended without pay for 6 weeks, required to complete a retraining program, and demoted out of branch management into a non-customer facing compliance role at a different location, a job with less prestige and, Kathleen suspected, considerably less pressure. She didn't know if it would fix whatever fear had made him do what he did. She only knew that firing him would have made her feel powerful for about a day and would have done nothing for the next customer who walked into a branch looking to somebody scared and cornered, like an easy number to hit. "There's something else," Walter said, sliding a folder across the table, the kind of gesture that made Kathleen's chest tighten slightly an old instinct from years of bad news arriving in folders. We pulled personnel records going back through the building's history, cleaning contractors, maintenance staff, going back to the 90s. He paused. There was a woman on the night crew here for almost 11 years, Odell Gaines. Cathleen didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at the name on the page, her mother's handwriting on an old employment form, the same loops and slants Kathleen still recognized on birthday cards, tucked in a shoebox at home, and felt something come loose in her chest that she hadn't braced for, because grief doesn't wait for convenient moments, it just finds the gaps. She used to talk about a building downtown, Kathleen said finally, quiet. She never said which one. I never asked. She would have walked these floors, Walter said, gently, for over a decade, before any of us who work here now. Kathleen thought of her mother's hands, the smell of orange oil and bleach that never fully left them, hands that had wiped down desks and emptied trash cans in a building that would one day, without either of them ever knowing it was coming, owe her daughter an apology in a marble lobby. She thought about how her mother used to say, ironing at 11 at night, sleeves rolled to the elbow, you just have to be undeniable, and wondered now if some small, unspoken part of that sentence had been aimed at this exact kind of room, this exact kind of building, without either of them having the words for it yet. She didn't cry in the conference room. She waited until she was back in her SUV in the parking garage, engine off, hands on the wheel, and let it out there, quick and hard, the way you let out something you've been carrying so long it starts to feel like part of your skeleton. The financial literacy program launched that spring. Kathleen had turned down every version of the ending the bank's marketing team pitched her. No plaque with her name on it, no ribbon-cutting photo op, no press conference. She asked for something smaller and more specific instead. A rotating class, taught inside actual branches by tellers and staff who wanted to teach it, open to anyone who walked in and asked, no appointment required, no credit check to attend, just people teaching other people the things nobody had ever sat Kathleen down and explained when she was 19 years old folding towels and doing algebra on the back of a receipt. What a credit score actually measures, how compound interest works for you or against you depending on which side of the loan you're standing on, the difference between a checking account and getting taken advantage of by overdraft fees that quietly drain people who can least afford it. Desmond Waller taught the first class at the Ellsworth branch on a Thursday evening in June. Folding chairs set up in the lobby after closing, 11 people in the audience, mostly young, a few older folks who never quite trusted banks and had their reasons. Kathleen sat in the back for that first one, unannounced, in jeans and a plain sweater nobody would look at twice, and watched him stumble a little over his opening line before finding his footing, watched him explain interest rates using an analogy about a garden hose that made a teenage girl in the second row actually laugh out loud and lean forward. After class, he found Kathleen by the door. I looked into it, he said. My mother worked at a school cafeteria 2 blocks from here for 19 years. I asked around, old employees, that kind of thing. He paused, working up to it. Your mother's name came up. Odell. They used to take their breaks at the same diner sometimes, my mom and some of the cleaning crew from downtown. Different building, but close. I don't know if they knew each other exactly, but I think they might have crossed paths. Kathleen didn't say much. She just nodded and touched his arm briefly and let that small, unprovable, deeply felt connection sit between them without needing to be resolved into something tidier than it was. Some threads don't need proof to matter. They just need somebody willing to notice them. Months later, on an ordinary Tuesday, Kathleen came back to the Ellsworth branch to open a small account for Imani, her daughter's first. A graduation gift, more symbolic than large, $100 and a lecture about interest that Imani only half listened to with the specific patience of a 19-year-old indulging her mother. While they waited, Kathleen watched Desmond tell her now instead of guard, a promotion that had taken him 8 months and 2 extra certifications to earn, helping a teenage girl fill out savings account paperwork at the next window. The girl was maybe 16, nervous, counting out crumpled bills from an envelope, and Desmond was patient with her, the way somebody had clearly once been patient with him, walking her through each line slowly, letting her ask her questions twice if she needed to. Kathleen didn't say anything. She didn't need her name on a plaque, didn't need anyone in that room to know what it had taken to get here, the torn check, the shaking hands under the counter, the sentence she'd swallowed instead of said. She just watched a girl who reminded her faintly of herself at that age walk out of that bank with her first savings account and her chin a little higher than when she'd walked in, and thought about her mother's hands, and thought that maybe this was what undeniable actually looked like. Not loud, not filmed, not going anywhere near the internet, just quiet and paid forward and true.